Peymon who?
Mottahedeh.
Peymon Mottahedeh. Who is he?
Never paid taxes in 30 years. Fought the U.S. tax court and won.
See, I believe our rights come from God, not from government.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Freedom Law School's Freedom Hour. I got for you now the second part in a three-part series about the gun-carrying IRS Special Agent with the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division who defected from the IRS back in 1999, exposed the fraud of the entire income tax system, and we covered as far as his background in part one, what led him to investigate all these issues, about income tax he heard, about Freedom Law School he heard, and he verified everything for himself, ended up confronting the IRS with a book about the income tax fraud, and ended up leaving the IRS, because the commissioner of the IRS did not want to talk about these issues, and he resigned. And he spoke at our first Freedom Rally back in 1999. So I'm going to bring back Joe Banister now. Before we do that, if you're interested to learn more about all this, go to our website, freedomlawschool.org, and Joe Banister's website is agentfortruth.org. So without any more hesitation, let me bring you Joe Banister. Joe, thanks for being with me again.
Thanks, Peymon. Thanks for having me. It's actually agentfortruth.com, but probably just misspoke there.
Yes, I did. Thanks for correcting me, Joe. So we, like I said, we talked last time when he resigned from the IRS because they did not respond to your request, IRS to review your book, to show, if you're wrong about this, if the income tax system is a scam, legally on the fraud of American people, you conclude that the income tax cannot be mandatory for American people the way it's written, and they would not respond to you. They said just leave. If otherwise, whatever, they don't care about you or your opinion or your research, and so you ended up leaving. So after you spoke at our Freedom Rally, that was in March 1999. You came across Bob Schulz of We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education. Tell us about how you met him, then go from there to how you ended up, going to the debates he set up with the government, please.
Well, I think actually Bob discovered me. So what happened was, I left the IRS on my birthday in 1999, February 25th, same date in 1913 when the government claimed that they ratified the 16th Amendment. So a date I'll certainly never forget. But after I left, I didn't have any work, right? Because I had had that job for almost 5.5 years. Nice, secure government pay. And so I was working at various contract accounting jobs. And, ever since when I first resigned, immediately I was getting calls and emails. We are talking about 1999. So a lot of the social media didn't exist. And maybe was Facebook even around? I don't know. But anyway, archaic times back in 1999. And so it was probably an email or might have been a phone call from someone who knew someone that Bob Schulz had come across my story. And Bob, who was from, upstate New York, and he had a talk radio show in New York. I presume it was like, Manhattan, or we broadcasted through, throughout downtown New York and upstate New York. And he was all about keeping the government in check, making sure that they were obeying federal and state constitutions, which is certainly a great pursuit. And one or more listeners informed him that this IRS special agent had recently resigned and was talking about the income tax and all of the, the scam of the income tax and the manner in which it's enforced. versus what the law, actually says on the books that Congress passed and the president has signed. And so Bob invited me on his show. And, well, Peymon, you probably know more than anyone since you met me even before I resigned, that I'm not exactly a media savvy guy, to say the least. And so anyway, I'm getting these calls from people and they want me to be on their radio show or their podcast. They didn't have podcasts then, by telephone, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And I'm just kind of accepting invitations, right? I don't really know who these people are, what they're about. I just figure if I'm invited and they're interested in what happened to me, I'll come on. So I first came on Bob's radio show. Don't know how long, he had the show or whatever, but apparently my voice was broadcasted over the greater New York boroughs and into upstate New York one day. And it was probably like March or April, probably prior to April 15th for sure. And, so that's really how I met Bob, was just on the radio, and came to find out that he, was very well known in New York for holding the government accountable. And he basically had an idea. Well, his show would ask the listeners, what should we do next? We found out this information, what should we do about it? Which again is a great posture to have. And so the idea that was cooked up was that there would be a symposium in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club, which some may know is like literally right across the street from the Treasury building, and literally right from the White House. It's literally like a block away, as I recall. And so Bob, having media connections and all the experience that he had, I don't know if he was maybe in his 60s at the time. Now he's in his 80s. Anyway, so he set up this whole symposium, and like I said before, I'm just kind of going where I'm invited. And so Bob decided to have this symposium, and he invited not only myself, but some of the people that I referred to in my report that I had issued to the IRS. And you may even remember, because of various advertisements and your involvement so far back, what's it called? I forget what the symposium was even called. Do you recall?
The first one did not have a name, but what I do remember, Joe, was that it was Bill Conklin was there, because he talked about the right to be silent. The Fifth Amendment protects our right to be silent, to give not any information to the government that they accuse against you. And we had Bill Benson was there talking about the 16th Amendment of the Constitution not being properly ratified. And you were the three of you were the main stars. D.V. Kidd spoke for a little bit also. But that was the big thing about it. But the way it got extra publicity was really the interesting thing about it. You ought to tell our listeners how it got more publicity you guys planned at a symposium.
Well, yeah, maybe it was just called like Symposium on the Income Tax. But anyway, what happened was, and I don't know whether Bob had anything to do with this or this is just typical, but C-SPAN, which, again, we're talking 1999 versus today. C-SPAN a lot of times was how people would get news about what was going on in D.C. And as I understand it, especially people in Congress, the staffers, the congressmen, congresswomen, the senators, would have C-SPAN going on in their offices and throughout the halls of the Capitol and the White House and everywhere. So in terms of a media organ that D.C. was dialed into, C-SPAN was definitely that. And so, however it came about, C-SPAN covered that July 1999 symposium. And so we learned, the group of us who spoke, and Bob as well, and Bob once Bob had me on his radio show, we became, I want to say close. We were geographically far away. I've never been to his house. I don't think he's ever been to mine. But he definitely, we kept in close contact because we had a similar goal, to hold the federal government accountable regarding the income tax. And so I learned from him that the symposium being broadcast on C-SPAN was huge. I mean, like, it literally got everyone's attention in D.C. or,
If I may interrupt you for a second, Joe, here's how I remember what happened then. What happened was that C-SPAN was supposed to cover something at this place, but those guys got canceled. And right next door to them, at the National Press Club, the symposium that Bob Schulz set up with you and others was scheduled. So C-SPAN staff figured that, well, this event we're going to cover got canceled, but there's another one right here. We can cover this one while we're at it on income taxing. Oh, that's an interesting topic. What the heck? We're already here. And when they did that, that was seen widely, not just by D.C., but this was C-SPAN was a lot of people across America used to see it because it was cable news shows back at the time. You still have broadcast them with antennas in America. Cable news was big, so you'd have no internet. I mean, YouTube was very, very new at the time, so this got, in fact, and they sold, I remember, the video of it, 3.5 hours, they sold it for I think like $50-$60 of back then money. And that was the most sold recording of C-SPAN that they ever had. Anything that broadcast in America, people could buy the video of it to play at their home. But this was the most requested one they ever had in history. So yes, that was a huge thing. It was a luck. It was that the C-SPAN covered the symposium by accident, basically, yeah. But this was not the first time, though. By the way, that's available on our website and on Joe's website. It's available. We call it Illegality and Income Tax Exposed. It was done July 1999. But after that, though, tell us about the USA Today ads, how that ended up being on, several times on USA Today. Please, Joe.
I'm sorry, about the ads?
Yeah, because there was more symposiums that was done by Bob, and correct me if I'm wrong, he invited the IRS, he invited the Department of Injustice, his leadership, DOJ, he invited heads of Congress, someone from the president's office was contacted and writing, hey, come and send somebody, come on, debate Joe Banister. And he also, by that time, from IRS agent Sherry Jackson and John Turner had stepped forward, contacted, because of you, Bob Schulz, and they said, hey, we're former IRS agents and we agree with Joe. The income tax is a giant fraud, right? So now, instead of just Joe alone, he became the three amigos, the three of you together, And so that symposiums, additional ones in D.C., and how many times government showed up to these symposiums, Joe? Exactly. Zero. They never, ever showed up. In fact, I remember one time, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, you were there at around the IRS's building with Bob Schulz. You guys were demonstrating in there. And the commissioner of IRS was seeing you guys from up there, but wouldn't come down, agree to debate you guys, or send somebody else. Is that correct?
Yes. There's a picture of Sherry, John, and I with Bob, and we're standing outside of the Treasury building because they wouldn't let us in. Mm-hmm. And inside was a press conference that was being held by the IRS commissioner. Mm-hmm. And David K. Johnston, formerly with the New York Times, who I'm not really the greatest fan of, but he posed the question, a bit mismatched, but he posed a question, which you probably have on your website too, and it's in America, Freedom to Fascism, where, as I recall, David K. Johnston asked the commissioner, there's a group of people outside. He was referring to us, Bob, Sherry, Joe, and John. There's a group of people outside who claim that we're not required to pay taxes. So, of course, right away, I don't like, he doesn't specify about income taxes, because that's a huge difference between just saying taxes generically and income taxes. But anyway, still glad that he asked the question. And he asked it of, what was that commissioner's name? Iverson?
Iverson, right. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and again, maybe you can splice in or put a link when you have this archive of this interview.
Yes.
It's a great, it's like a once-in-a-lifetime question. Not quite the question I would have asked, but very good for a New York Times reporter. Mm-hmm. And also the commissioner's response. Mm-hmm. And of course, after being directly asked by a New York Times reporter, is there a law that requires us to pay taxes? Mm-hmm. And all that the commissioner can say is, well, I've been paying my taxes since I was, 12 years old and my paper route, and we need money for wars and welfare and, blah, blah, blah. But he couldn't point to a single law. And then maybe it was like a deputy commissioner, female lady, pushes him out of the way. Like, well, we don't want to have any more from the commissioner right now. So the leapfrogging, the building of effort, it just grew exponentially. Mm-hmm. And as I say, maybe Bob Schulz wouldn't have even known about me if you hadn't had me speak at your rally or didn't see a flyer or one of his listeners didn't. And literally, and this is a lesson that I always tell people who feel like they're not doing anything worthwhile for the good of the cause. DV Kid wasn't getting paid for any of her radio shows, hundreds that she did, maybe thousands. But there was an IRS special agent who just happened to be listening that one day in 1996 when she was on KSFO in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so who knows how many other times she was on shows, spoke, nobody really cared, or, nobody of consequence, or people who could be of consequence didn't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. Whatever. You keep trying. You keep taking a bite at the apple. Mm-hmm. And so in a similar way, you and I worked closely together in 1997, 98 before I even resigned. Mm-hmm. You introduced me to other people who were skeptical, if I was sincere. And we just kept building. And so, the interview or that question from Johnston to the commissioner probably wouldn't have happened without the We the People effort. Mm-hmm. But the We the People effort wouldn't have happened without the Bob Schulz interview of Joe Banister. And then that wouldn't have happened if, there wasn't a March Freedom Law School rally. So, we need to keep trying and keep being sincere, keep being good examples. And, ultimately it's going to be God's timetable, whether, when we get delivered from the income tax. But all we can do is do our best, tell the truth. And anyway, that's what was going on with Bob Schulz and the We the People Foundation. Mm-hmm. He interspersed with these symposiums. One, as you say, happened in July of 1999. I think another one was in November of 1999. And there were 3 or 4 USA Today ads. Bob, as he always did, he said, well, what do we do next? We have our July symposium and the government doesn't show up, even though they're invited. And we have our November symposium and the government's invited. We're literally right across the street. They can just walk across the street and have a talk with us. No government shows up. And believe me, Bob had invited them officially. So at one point, he's like, well, what else do we do? And so the idea came up that we create full-page, like centerfold ads in the USA Today. And again, for those people who were born, after 2000 or in the late 90s, a lot of us had to rely on newspapers for our news. And so, and the USA Today was delivered to millions of hotel rooms. That was the way that they would, filter their controlled news to millions of people traveling. And so the idea was hatched, well, why don't we put full-page ads in the USA Today so that when people open up their paper in the morning and they're sipping their coffee and they're like, what's this? The income tax is a scam? I mean, where else would they ever hear that or see that in 1999 and 2000? So the ads were very effective. In fact, I think they were so effective that by the time Bob wanted to run an additional ad, the USA Today refused to accept his money and run the ad.
Yes, after the fourth ad, because they're each, I think 50,000 each, if I remember, or 25,000. I think 40,000 each. It was Mike Bodine's idea. He was Bob's assistant. So let's try that, see how that works. And Mike Bodine gave his that was a lot of money back then. And to him, it was a lot of his own personal money, funded it, the first one. And so after the first one, they came out in 2000. Then there were 3 more done in early 2001. And then after that, then the USA Today told Bob Schulz, no more ads for you. We don't want your money. Obviously, they were contacted by the IRS and saying, you're giving these bad guys exposure, publicity. Let's cancel their way of reaching the American people. And I'm going to show people right here, guys. This is the very first one of the USA Today ads that came out in 99. And but what was most interesting, I remember, Joe, in this one, is that Bob put in here the part in green. You cannot read very well, but I'll read it for you. That citizens cannot voluntarily file a federal income tax return without surrendering their Fifth Amendment right to not to bear witness against themselves. But here's the most interesting part. Okay. On June 2nd, the White House reneged on their promises it made during the April 13th meeting. As with 3 previous conferences, the government has again refused to debate the grievances. And Jason Furman of the White House, he was the senior economic advisor of the National Economic Council, okay? He told Bob Schulz, the legality of the income tax is not a high priority item at the White House, and we will not participate in any converse on the subject. End of quote. So I saw that in the answer. I thought, whoa, they're open about it. They don't care if they get your money but following the Constitution and laws. To the federal government, we, the American people, you are simply a dumb, stupid sheep for them to shear. Make you afraid of them? Stand in line? We'll shear you of your wool. You need to stay warm? No. The government will take your money. We damn the laws of the Constitution. They don't care to discuss the legality of income tax. And obviously, this mafia does not want to participate in any conference on the subject. Well, why would they? Why would any criminal or mobster want to have a debate about their criminality and acts of criminality they've done? They don't want to give exposure to it. They want to cover it up. So that's the thing that really got my attention, Joe. I remember about that. And I remember, Joe, that around this time, Joe, Bob told me one time he had 120,000 people on his email list. Back then, people, remember there was no social media. It was maybe MySpace was just getting started. There was no Facebook. So that was pretty big. 120,000 people were interested, opted in to get emails and faxes more than that as well. And those got forwarded to other people, you know, those emails and faxes. So this was a movement really going big. And when US Today said no more ads for you, then Bob Schulz put an ad in the New York Times. And he did that, or American Free Press. And then he also, Joe, if you remember, he had us all travel from across America with Remonstrance, which is like a complaint to government, to follow the Constitution on income tax, and declaring war by Congress, not the president, stuff like that. And we all drove, myself and you, from California, many others drove to go serve our Congress members about the government must follow the U.S. Constitution and laws. And we served our congressmen in person as much as we could. I was lucky enough to be one of the, I think maybe just a few people who actually got to meet my congressman, okay? And his name was Lewis, in person. I think his wife liked me. She just let me in because I was the president of Freedom Law School. She thought I was a young law school president like Harvard. You know, she didn't know. It's a home-based law school. She let me in, talked to him, and I talked to him about this stuff, but typical rhino, political hack, you know, I could tell he had not interest in this stuff at all. And so we did all that stuff together back in those days. But maybe you could tell our audience a little bit more. The last symposium that we did with Larry B. Kraft and John Turner, a couple other people. Tell everybody about that symposium, please, Joe.
Sure. Well, that was the Truth and Taxation hearing.
Yes.
And what happened was, we could go on and on, couldn't we, about all the efforts that we made, significant efforts. But Bob Schulz decided that he was going to do a hunger fast and stop eating and patrol the halls of Congress until he could get someone to agree to hear our petitions, our grievances about the income tax. You know, here, look at our evidence showing that we're being lied to about the income tax. And so finally, Roscoe Bartlett, who was a congressman from Maryland, noticed that Bob had a Constitution in his pocket, which Bob always carried. And it turns out that Roscoe Bartlett also always carried a Constitution in his pocket. And so they began chatting, and Bob was able to secure Roscoe Bartlett's cooperation in scheduling a hearing, like an actual official congressional hearing. And so, of course, in the past, as we discussed earlier in your show, government never showed up. But maybe if we can get a congressman involved, we can get them to show up. So they actually had a meeting, Bob Schulz, Roscoe Bartlett, the House Rep, and Dan Bryant, who was in the DOJ, high up in the DOJ at the time. And apparently there might have been an IRS official too, I don't recall, but they actually signed a letter, on Roscoe Bartlett's letterhead, the DOJ, that they would supply DOJ officials to attend this congressional hearing on the income tax. And as I was told, the IRS agreed to supply people, but the IRS wouldn't put it in writing, if you can believe the irony. So it was like, I think in the summer of 2001.
Yes, correct.
And the hearing was supposed to occur like in September or October, and September 11th happened. The Twin Towers attacks, the Pentagon, and all of a sudden they had a great excuse to say, "Oh, we can't have the hearing anymore," because the country's basically everybody has to batten down the hatches. We're in a war. We can't be dealing with these domestic issues, and they decided that we're not bringing our people. The DOJ backed out, IRS backed out, and Roscoe Bartlett backed out. And so for all those efforts to get a hearing, Congress, our congressperson, Roscoe Bartlett, refused to continue to help us. Mm-hmm. So Bob, to his credit, said, well, that's not going to stop us. We may not be able to hold the hearing officially within the halls of Congress, but we're going to have one anyway.
Before we go on to that, Joe, let me just add a little bit, if I may, that Bob decided to have a hunger fast to death. I mean, literally. And he had like, I think, 40 days plus of hunger fast before Congressman Bartlett said, hey, listen, I'll help out with this thing, you know. But September 11, 9/11 was the excuse for the government to say, we don't want to do this thing now. We got to deal with terrorists out there. All this other stuff inside, which put him off later on, which many people feel today. The Epstein file, scandal, which was, has been showing up and getting worse and worse and worse. Many people feel that's what's going on with the war against Iran. Okay, now Epstein file, openness takes a back seat to, we have a war going on with this terrorist nation. The government says we have to go bomb them to pieces. So this was the same kind of a thing, looks like they did, Joe, here in this situation. So they got out of it that way. But tell us about the symposium you were after that, huh?
So we did end up scheduling it anyway, and all of the witnesses, we were all preparing for a congressional hearing, so designating witnesses and gathering evidence. So we were already doing that anyway. And so Bob had to, reserve a hotel, I forget, somewhere in D.C. or Virginia, right in the belly of the beast, and reserve a whole conference room and, a huge symposium, not only for the participants, but all of the audience to see live. And so, it was really impressive when you consider, 25 years ago, the kind of technology that was available. But as far as I recall, it was live streamed. Of course, there was a recording made of the entire proceeding. And one by one, witnesses were brought forward with evidence. And so people like myself, former IRS Revenue Officer John Turner, former IRS Revenue Agent Sherry Jackson. I don't know if you recall Paul Chappell. Mm-hmm. He was a Treasury lawyer back in the 50s when they revised the 39 Internal Revenue Code to become the 1954 Internal Revenue Code. And Paul Chappell got in touch with me, one of dozens of attorneys, by the way, over the years that not only had learned the truth, but were willing to speak about it. But Paul, I thought, was one of the most extraordinary attorneys because he literally worked for the Treasury Department. He was part of the process of upgrading the 1939 Internal Revenue Code to the 1954 code. And yet he was calling me saying, bravo, the income tax is a scam. It's a vast majority of Americans aren't required to pay it. So I was just gobsmacked, and I think he was in his 80s back in the early 2000s, right? I mean, he's very elderly. He actually was blind by that point. He had lost his eyesight, but he was still practicing law, even with his minimal to non-existent sight. And Paul Chappell was also one of the people that testified. So, again, maybe you're really good at gathering footage. Maybe you've got some or all of that footage. I know Bob Schulz does. I've rewatched some of it, even in the last few months. And it's just fascinating how much evidence was put together and discussed and testified to. And then, but the one party that never showed up, despite multiple attempts and going into their backyard, right, to get them to come to the table was the government.
Yep.
They just absolutely refused over and over and over again, despite official invitations, despite us bending over backwards to accommodate them. And it's more than suspicious, obviously. They don't want to debate because the debate will show that they've been lying to the American people for over 100 years.
So, Joe, I think we're about to wrap up this part 2 because the part 3, the last part, is going to be the most interesting part you don't want to miss. And that is when the IRS and the Department of Injustice were sick and tired of Joe Banister going out there exposing a fraud to the American people. So they decided, you know what, we got to put this guy out. So they decided to try to put Joe in prison, okay, for which I'll tell you they failed. But how they failed is going to be the next part 3 of this interview we'll have. We'll have it sometime in early April, okay, with Joe Banister. So if you have not seen part 1, go see how the link is below. The video is mentioned you heard here. We're going to put the links to them and the ones that we have in this description below. They're going to also be put on Joe Banister's website pretty soon. We're going to put it on there as well. So, Joe, you want to give me your website one more time, please, for people to check out?
Sure, thank you. Agent for Truth, that's FOR, agentfortruth.com.
Yep. So, there it is, people. You know, the government has not been working for you for a long time. You've been working for them. Okay? It's the other way around. That's how the Founding Fathers didn't want it to be the way it is today. And it's to change, if it's to be a different outcome, to be the way it was under the Founding Fathers, that should be today, it's up to you and me. And if not now, when? When will we as Americans take action and stop this fraud on American people, our families, pays for all this corruption, this wars? This war with Iran could end up being World War III. The Epstein blackmail cover-up for Israel that's being covered up right now, because that's why they want to shut it down. You'll expose that we have an occupied government. That's right. Epstein was not Chinese, was not Russian, was not from Egypt, or France. He was a Zionist Jew in cahoots with Mossad, okay, and doing a blackmail operation. That's why this war is going on right now, okay? On behalf of a country, we have no formal alliance like we have with NATO countries like England and Germany and France, because they bought our government, our politicians. We're going to get it back with our money, your money, not going to our enemies, not going to enemies of the American people. But you keep it, support truth-telling freedom media out there, and elect people that represent the American people and the Constitution. Like former Congressman Ron Paul, the current Congressman Thomas Massey. We can do it. If we stop giving billions of our money to the enemies, take it back for ourselves, our families, and elect people. Fund election people that represent you and me, the American people. So go to freedomlawschool.org to take action, to do something about this now. freedomlawschool.org. On a drive to and for work and shopping, play our videos. You'll know it all in a matter of just a few weeks at most. Joe Banister's website. Go there, listen, watch his interviews. Okay. So, Joe, do you have any last comments you want to say to our audience before we close this interview until the next one?
Just kind of mentioned it before, but just be a good example to everyone. So let's all stay calm. Let's make sure that when we discuss this issue, people go, "Wow, that guy makes a lot of sense," or "That gal makes a lot of sense." We'll just have to be patient, but keep working at it. We've made tremendous progress over the last, decades and decades, long before you and I came on board, right? But we just keep chipping away at it, and we will eventually, establish honorable or honest taxation, at least constitutional taxation. That'd be a good start. So thanks to everyone, and God bless everyone.
Thank you for being with us, Joe. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, my brothers and sisters, I'm going to end this thing for tonight, and I invite you to know that you were meant to live free. Otherwise, you would not have come across this broadcast. So now it is up to you to take the next step and educate yourself and de-brainwash yourself of the lies of the past that, oh, the safe thing to do is to file income tax anyways because otherwise they'll get you if you don't file. I'm afraid. That's all lies. 80 million plus non-filers out there. Yes, 80 million plus, folks. Don't be afraid. Stop putting the rope around your neck. Stop giving it to the IRS for that 1040 form. That's what gets you. Do not file that 1040 form unless you're from a citizen or resident of Washington, D.C. They're the only people by law required to file and pay federal income taxes. The people of the 50 states, like you and me, who are never meant to pay. We've been duped and tricked and then coerced through mental games to become slaves. So with that, I give you all my love and I wish you all the very best to be free as individuals, as families, and working together. We can have America be free again. We can restore freedom. We have a Restore Freedom plan also. Check it out on our website, freedomlawschool.org. Thank you.